The regime of Sheikh Hasina was not a democratic regime.
All power concentrated in one person.
State-sponsored highway robbery.
You get anything you want. It's a free-for-all.
The scale of corruption in Bangladesh is beyond anything I've ever seen in any country in the world.
When you are doing mega corruption, you can't hide it and you don't care.
Kleptocracy and grand corruption are a global problem, and the UK is at the heart of that problem.
A lot of money allegedly stolen from Bangladesh has arrived in Britain, mostly invested in real estate.
Knowing that money has been stolen is one thing, but getting it back is something else.
This is one of the largest and most complicated asset recoveries in history.
In the summer of 2024, frustration with the regime of Sheikh Hasina came to a head when the government came up with this jobs quota scheme that would have favored relatives of members of Hasina's party, the Awami League. Hasina was also becoming an increasingly tyrannical leader, jailing opponents en masse. My name is John Reed, and I'm the FT's South Asia Bureau Chief. So when you walk around Dhaka, you still see graffiti and protest art everywhere that was put up by the students a year ago during the uprising against Hasina. It's quite something to see.
I'm Rafiya Ridi. I was a coordinator of anti-discriminatory student movement. At the early days, there were no direct confrontation with police, but on 14th July, police created like this chain and also put the barricades on the streets.
My name is Rizwan Ahmed Rifat. I was one of the coordinators of Students Against Discrimination. Police, together with the ruling party's armed cadres, pounded upon the protesters with live ammunition, with sniper shot, with shell rounds from helicopter. I was on the streets armed with sticks and stones.
So the crunch point came on August 5th. That's when police refused to fire on protesters, and Hasina was forced to flee into exile in India.
The UN estimates that around 1,400 people died during the protests, but thousands more went missing or were injured, and the real toll is not really known.
So even today, Hasina's supporters deny that she had anything to do with the violence.
There are a few different theories going around, but one of the most interesting that I've heard from a senior Awami League figure is that Islamists posed as members of the Awami League student wing in order to then incite violence and lead to this sort of wider protest movement that then led to Sheikh Hasina's downfall. I've not seen any evidence to support these claims whatsoever.
People were also getting disgusted with the level of corruption coming from Hasina and her circle, especially around the large amounts of money that they were rumored to be taking out of the country and spiriting away abroad.
A lot of money allegedly stolen from Bangladesh has ended up in the UK.
When you come out of Whitechapel station, there's a sign that says "Welcome to Whitechapel" that's written in English but also in Bengali. So obviously the links between Bangladesh and the UK go back to when Bangladesh was part of India, which was colonised, so there's been very long-standing ties. My name is Susanna and I cover commodities for the Financial Times, but I used to be based in Bangladesh as a journalist. The connections back and forth are very strong. That makes the UK a natural place for Bangladeshis to invest. The UK is also a natural place for many people in the world to invest, but all the more so if you've already got links.
It's tempting for us to think of kleptocracy and grand corruption as something that happens far away. But the important thing is to understand that kleptocracy and grand corruption are a global problem, and the UK is at the heart of that problem. My name is Helen Taylor, and I'm the Deputy Director at Spotlight on Corruption. The UK is particularly attractive because of its huge financial sector, but also particularly attractive property market.
The UK has become a popular destination for Bangladeshi politicians from across the political spectrum, particularly those living here in exile. My name's Ray Fuddin. Last year, I was a reporter on the newspaper's Westminster lobby team. We had been investigating the ties between UK political parties and large donors when Bangladesh launched a probe into Sheikh Hasina and her family.
So we realized this was a global story for the FT because Hasina and her family are pretty global themselves. Her sister, Sheikh Rahana, is a UK citizen, and Rahana's daughter, Tulip Siddiq, is a Labour Party MP who until recently was a minister in the Starmer government.
Members of Sheikh Hasina and Sheikh Rahana's families, including Tulip Siddiq, have been accused in corruption probes by Bangladeshi authorities of embezzling funds from infrastructure projects. Some members of the two families are also on trial in Dhaka for allegedly using their influence to illegally obtain state-owned land.
There had been many questions about Tulip Siddiq in recent years, which all raised doubts about the compatibility of her role as the minister with responsibility for anti-corruption in the city at a time when there are allegations that her family had siphoned funds from an impoverished country.
Obviously, as someone who lived in Bangladesh and covered Bangladesh for years, I'd had a lot of tips about money that had been taken out of Bangladesh to the UK over that time. And then when Sheikh Hasina fell, I started to discuss with my colleague Raifuddin, how could we investigate these?
A source sent me a dossier of property filings and registrations. One of these filings stood out. It was an apartment in a block of flats in London's trendy King's Cross that Siddiq had come to acquire in the early 2000s when she couldn't have been more than 22 years old. That this property had been transferred to Siddiq by a property developer who found out that he had ties to the former Bangladeshi regime.
Now, this really sparked the investigation into Tulip Siddiq, which partly contributed to her having to resign earlier this year.
It's a completely politically motivated smear campaign trying to harass me. There is no evidence that I've done anything wrong.
The FT's investigation into Tulip Siddiq was one part of a much bigger jigsaw that explored hundreds of properties tied to the former Bangladeshi regime.
One person in particular, Saifuzman Chowdhury, the land minister, we found owned more than 300 properties in the UK.
It's extraordinary that he managed to buy 300 properties, at the least, in the UK. This is a cabinet minister in one of the poorest countries in the world, where you're not allowed to take out more than $12,000 out of the country.
The National Crime Agency has identified and frozen 350 properties, which tallies with the FT's investigation, which found more than 300 of those properties. Saifuzman Chowdhury hasn't responded to any questions put to him by the Financial Times.
During the rule of Sheikh Hasina's regime between 2009 and 2023, the interim government now estimates that up to $16 billion could have been siphoned out the country every year.
For a long time, power oscillated between Sheikh Hasina and Khaleda Zia, the leader of the BNP, the other main party in Bangladesh. And then in 2008, in December, there was an election that re-elected Sheikh Hasina, and this really changed the trajectory of Bangladesh.
I'm Badiul Alam Majumdar. Previously, I was head of the Electoral Reform Commission. During Hasina's time in power, my home was attacked. The American ambassador came to our home for a farewell dinner. And as she was leaving, her motorcade was attacked by Hasina's goons. Civil society's role is to be the watchdog and to make sure that the rulers rule according to law, and so be watchdog against corruption, against graft, and there was looting and plundering, which is rampant during Sheikh Hasina's rule.
The normal pattern of corruption in developing countries is that the ruling party has to find money to distribute to its supporters, and without that, they don't stay in power. My name is Mushtaq Khan. I'm a Bangladeshi. I work in the University of London, SOAS. I'm a professor of economics. What shouldn't happen is that when political parties capture the state, when that begins to happen, you lose control. And I think towards the end of its rule, the Awami League had lost control of the economy and had lost control of its own party.
Some of the things that happened under the old regime are like a movie plot.
I've got several friends who are imprisoned in a famous prison that has been recently uncovered called the House of Mirrors or the Hall of Mirrors, because the only person you would see inside there was yourself.
People close to the old regime took control of the banks with the help of the DGFI, Bangladesh's powerful military intelligence agency.
I am Muhammad Abdul Mannan. I had to resign from Islami Bank Bangladesh Limited under pressure. Our first board meeting in 2017 was supposed to be held in the boardroom of our bank, as we do always. It was said that it is not safe. My car was routed to the DGFI headquarters. I had to meet the chief of DGFI, General Akbar. He told me that the highest authority wants that I resign.
When he said the highest authority, who do you think he meant?
It is the Prime Minister.
We heard stories of bank directors being taken away, in some cases at gunpoint, by intelligence officials and being forced to resign their positions after signing over their shares to people close to the old regime.
It's an amazing thing, what they did. They simply removed the board on gunpoint and produced their own board, take over. Then issue loans to their cronies, loans quote unquote. Everybody knew that you don't have to pay it back.
One of the best ways to quantify the impact of this banking takeover is looking at non-performing loans and the rates of those, particularly after banks were taken over. And with state-owned banks, the rate of non-performing loans was already very high. Now, with a bank like Islami Bank, it really escalated after the takeover.
In theory, no family could have more than 10% of a bank, but in reality, a number of these groups controlled not just one bank, but multiple banks, and used their control of the banks to effectively award themselves loans. These fraudulent loans were being approved often to fictitious companies or even individuals who had no collateral or means to pay back these loans.
Alam Group is owned by Mohammed Saiful Alam, who is a tycoon, you could say, in Bangladesh. The interim government estimates that Saiful Alam or Alam and the group took out around 10 billion or maybe more from Bangladesh.
Alam has said this is categorically untrue.
In terms of how the money went overseas, broadly speaking, there is both over-invoicing, putting a much larger amount for those imports than the actual amounts going overseas, and under-invoicing, so they're bringing back less money from overseas earnings than expected. Another major area was informal channels.
There's this thing called hundi, which is very similar to what's known in other parts of the world as hawala, which is an informal way of transferring money. If I want to transfer money from London to Bangladesh, I give money to an agent here, and then that money is cashed out at the other end in Bangladesh by an agent there, minus the commission, and they settle that bill separately, but no money actually moves. Now, this can be legitimate or it can be illegitimate as a way to move laundered money.
Bangladesh, like actually a number of other developing countries, have capital controls. Individuals are not allowed to take out more than $12,000 without permission from the central bank.
Once the loan has been issued and everyone's taken their cut and it's never being paid back to the bank, that's where the hundi network comes in. Hundi is often used to move remittance money from the UK to Bangladesh, but it can also be used to move money from Bangladesh to the UK, and it can happen at a really big scale.
And one estimate they looted $234 billion in both from the banking sector and business sector in different ways. This is probably the biggest money plundering from any country in the world.
One of the things Bangladesh's Anti-Corruption Commission is looking into are allegations that people tied to the old regime skimmed funds from big infrastructure projects. One is the Padma Bridge project, which the World Bank declined to lend to because of corruption concerns. And another one was Bangladesh's first ever nuclear power plant.
None of this, by the way, was secret. It was in the press, in the media, people were openly talking about it. The corruption was very public and in your face, but no one cared because no one had the power to do anything about it. And most people were so atomized and fearful that if they spoke out, they would disappear. There were these massive processes of disappearing people, putting them into dungeons, mysterious killings, mysterious disappearances, that even though everyone knew what was going on, they kept quiet.
When Sheikh Hasina was forced to flee Bangladesh and go to India, there was a power vacuum, and Muhammad Yunus was asked to step in. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economist and the father of microlending, and also really disliked by Sheikh Hasina.
I'm Muhammad Yunus. I'm the chief advisor of government of Bangladesh. We know that our time is limited because this is an interim government, but we must start the process.
One of Yunus's first acts was to name Ahsan Mansour, a former IMF official, as his central bank governor and head of a task force on asset recovery.
I'm Ahsan Mansour. I'm currently the governor of Central Bank of Bangladesh. When I took over, we found that at least 11 of these banks, they didn't have the liquidity to pay the depositors who was asking for their money. I had to immediately step in, took over the banks, confiscated the shares that were held by previous owners. In order to keep the financial system functional, we had to inject 290 billion taka. Now we have to go for some selected resolution of those banks and find new investors and take it forward so that those banks may be consolidated, may be merged, and then start functioning like a normal, healthy bank.
The central bank governor estimates that S. Alam siphoned off $10 billion with the help of the DGFI, one of Bangladesh's security services.
S. Alam has also claimed that it's been wronged by the restrictions put on its banks in Bangladesh by the interim government because it's been prevented from lending and the management teams of those banks have been changed. So S. Alam Group claims to be the victim in all this. When Yunus first came to head the interim government, he had a lot of legitimacy. He's seen as very credible in Bangladesh and also internationally. Since then, things have become a bit more difficult.
So Yunus is under growing pressure to hold elections soon, but he says he needs to reform Bangladesh's corrupted institutions first. The date that he's currently giving is February 2026.
We have to do as much reform as possible. We don't want to create another fascist regime, weaponizing everything, the government functionaries and the judiciary and so on.
So the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the biggest opposition group during Sheikh Hasina's time, is almost certain to win.
While you've changed the top layer of government, you have a huge bureaucracy underneath him, which hasn't necessarily changed so very much.
When you steal billions of dollars or hundreds of millions, you actually can afford to hire the very best financial structurers and financial advisors and legal experts in the world to help you move and hide your money. My name is Adhere Islam. I'm an advisor, a consultant to the governor of Bangladesh Bank and to the Asset Recovery Task Force.
So Bangladesh is struggling with a lack of experts with enough skills to lay the groundwork for prosecutions that might bring some of this money back.
One of the challenges for the Asset Recovery Task Force is that this has been something that people that stole those assets have been planning for a long time. You can't recover money unless you know where it's gone to.
One of the problems of asset recovery is that often it involves settlements, essentially cut a deal with the tycoon or whoever stole the cash and got it out of the country. It becomes a balance between getting the money back and what's acceptable to the Bangladeshi public.
Criminal prosecutions, the evidence bar is quite high. So I think getting that balance right is one of the challenges.
People say you cannot get all of them. I said, whatever amount we can get, we have to find the concrete evidences, follow the track, get to the support of the relevant governments.
If the Yunus administration can get governments elsewhere to take action like has happened in the UK with the National Crime Agency, then those wheels will be set in motion and they'll be hard to stop. I think in terms of Bangladesh, a big question mark remains over how much power and influence these conglomerates that allegedly took this cash out in the first place under Sheikh Hasina, they will have over any future government, and that will dictate whether corruption continues to be pervasive in the country.
While Bangladesh's revolution seems like a turning point, it's also possible that the country could revert to a situation where one group has too much political power, except in this case it would be the BNP, not the Awami League.
The aspirations of the people who came out on the streets were very high. It will take time to get anywhere close to that, but reform of the basic institutions that are now center stage, and I think it will be very hard to push that back, whoever comes to power.
Our fear is that maybe we will not be able to fulfill our promises that we have promised to our martyrs. That is the biggest fear right now.